You brought back a canteen full of sand? The question cut through the supply room before Lieutenant Emily Carter had even taken off her gloves. The room was bright with fluorescent light and busy with the end-of-mission noise of boots, radios, clipboards, and men trying to sound braver than they felt. Emily stepped in from the desert heat with dust across her white skin, a scratch along one cheek, and her pale hair tied back so tightly that not a strand moved when the door slammed behind her. She did not look dramatic. She did not look angry. She looked tired in the quiet way of someone who had spent all her strength somewhere no one else had seen. On the left side of her vest, almost hidden beneath ash-colored dust, sat her small silver-winged shield badge, the one the younger soldiers had started joking about weeks ago because it looked too polished, too personal, too much like something from a hero story. Emily reached for the old metal canteen on her belt and set it on the table. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. A few heads turned. Corporal Tyler Brooks, 19 months into his enlistment and still hungry for an audience, leaned away from a crate of medical packs and lifted his eyebrows. "That thing sounds full," he said. "Hope you saved some for the rest of us." Emily did not answer. She loosened the cap with slow fingers. The room kept moving around her until the first stream of sand spilled out across the table. It poured in a dry, rough line, grain after grain, darker than the sand outside the base, mixed with tiny black flecks that caught in the light. For 1 second, nobody spoke. Then Tyler laughed. It started as a short breath through his nose, then grew louder when 2 other soldiers looked his way. "She crossed half the desert and brought back dirt," he said. Someone near the lockers gave a low whistle. Another voice muttered, "Survival training must have changed." The laughter spread, not wild, not cruel enough to be called an attack, but sharp enough to make the air change. Emily stood with one hand resting beside the canteen, her knuckles scraped, her nails rimmed with soot. She did not defend herself. She did not explain that the canteen had been full of water that morning. She did not say where the water had gone. She only watched the sand settle into a small dark mound on the steel table. Commander Jack Reynolds had entered just before the laughter started, but he stayed at the doorway, unseen by most of the room. He had known Emily Carter for 6 months, long enough to understand one thing about her. She never carried anything without a reason. Tyler picked up the canteen and shook it once, making the last grains rattle inside. "Great plan, Lieutenant," he said, smiling at the room. "When everybody else runs out of water, you can drink the whole state of Arizona." This time fewer soldiers laughed. Emily's eyes moved from the canteen to Tyler's face, calm and unreadable. The dust on her silver-winged shield shifted as she breathed. Outside, the desert wind pressed against the walls. Inside, Commander Reynolds finally stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the sand, because something about it did not belong to the base, and something about Emily Carter's silence felt heavier than the canteen ever had. Commander Reynolds stepped fully into the supply room, and the laughter began to die in uneven pieces. A few soldiers straightened without being told. Tyler Brooks lowered the canteen, but he kept that half-smile on his face, the kind young men sometimes wore when they had already gone too far and did not know how to walk it back. Emily Carter did not look at the commander first. She reached for a cloth from the edge of the table and wiped a narrow line through the dust covering her silver-winged shield badge. The small emblem caught the light for a moment, clean silver against a uniform marked by heat, smoke, and miles of desert road. There was nothing loud about her. That was what had fooled people from the first day she arrived at the forward base. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, lean from years of training, with clear eyes, a quiet voice, and a face that made some people mistake calm for softness. She did not fill rooms with stories. She did not lean back in chairs and list the places she had been. During briefings, she listened more than she spoke. At meals, she sat where she could see the exits and ate slowly, as if every ordinary moment had to be earned. To the younger soldiers, that silence looked like uncertainty. To the older ones who had seen enough deployments, it looked like discipline. Emily had learned long ago that respect offered too quickly could disappear just as fast, so she never asked for it. She arrived early. She checked her gear twice. She carried extra gauze, extra water, and a roll of children's stickers in the side pocket of her pack, because fear became easier to manage when a small hand had something bright to hold. No one in the room knew that. They knew only what they wanted to see. A beautiful white woman with dust on her face, a strange personal badge on her vest, and a canteen that had come back from patrol filled with sand. Tyler had noticed her from the beginning. He had watched how commanders trusted her with quiet assignments, how radio operators lowered their voices when she entered, how medics made room for her without asking questions. It bothered him because he could not explain it. In his world, authority was supposed to announce itself. Emily never did. That made her easy to test in front of other people. Reynolds stopped beside the table and looked down at the mound of dark sand. He did not touch it yet. The black flecks were not ordinary dust. The grains clung together in places, as if they had been near heat, water, or both. Emily's gloves lay beside the canteen, the fingertips worn pale from gripping something rough. On her right sleeve, a small burned edge curled upward near the cuff. Tyler followed the commander's gaze and gave a nervous shrug. "We were just giving her a hard time, sir," he said. "No harm meant." Emily's expression did not change. Reynolds kept his eyes on the table. "Lieutenant Carter," he said quietly, "where did this come from?" For the first time since entering the room, Emily looked directly at him. Her voice was low, steady, and tired. "Not from the route back, sir." The supply room became still enough for the hum of the overhead lights to sound louder. Tyler's smile faded a little. Reynolds studied her face, then the canteen, then the dark sand spread across the steel. He had seen Emily return from difficult assignments before, but never like this. Never carrying silence as if it weighed more than her pack. Tyler set the canteen down, but the damage of the joke stayed in the room like dust that would not settle. He looked around for support, hoping the others would laugh again, hoping the moment could turn back into something harmless. No one gave him enough to work with. A private near the medical crates suddenly found interest in a supply checklist. 2 radio technicians stood very still beside the charging station. The young sergeant who had laughed first pressed his lips together and looked at Emily's sleeve, where the small burned edge curled like a warning he had missed. Tyler cleared his throat. "I mean, Lieutenant, it is just strange," he said, forcing a lighter tone. "You leave with full gear and come back with a souvenir from a sandbox. People are going to ask questions." Emily picked up her gloves and folded them once, carefully, as if the shape of the leather mattered more than the words aimed at her. Her hands were steady, but there was a faint red mark across one palm where a strap had rubbed through. Reynolds noticed it. He also noticed the way she kept her left shoulder slightly forward, protecting her ribs without making it obvious. Emily Carter had been trained to hide pain from people who might mistake it for weakness. Tyler mistook everything. "Maybe next time," he continued, encouraged by the sound of his own voice, "bring back something useful. Water, coordinates, anything that does not pour out on the table." A few soldiers shifted uneasily. Emily looked at the mound of sand. The black flecks inside it seemed darker under the overhead lights. She remembered a small room filled with smoke, a row of frightened faces low to the floor, and a door that would not stay open unless something heavy held it back. The memory touched her eyes for less than a second and disappeared before anyone but Reynolds could read it. "That is enough, Corporal," Reynolds said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room cleanly. Tyler straightened. "Yes, sir," but he could not stop himself from adding, "I just do not understand why she will not say what happened." Emily finally turned her head toward him. She was not angry. That made it worse. Anger would have given Tyler something to push against. Her calm left him standing alone with his own words. "Some things are not told in a supply room," she said. The sentence landed softly, but it changed the temperature of the room. Reynolds stepped closer to the table and reached for the canteen. He turned it in his hand, studying the dents along the metal body. One dent was deep and fresh, pressed inward near the base. Another mark ran across the side in a long scrape, as if the canteen had been dragged across concrete or stone. Near the cap, dried residue clung to the threads, pale and rough. It was not ordinary desert dust. Tyler saw the commander's expression tighten, and his confidence began to thin. "Sir," he asked. Reynolds did not answer him. He looked at Emily again. "Was this in the village?" Emily's jaw moved once before she spoke. "Yes, sir. At the school." The room stopped breathing. Emily's fingers closed around the folded gloves. "Yes, sir." Tyler glanced from Reynolds to Emily, then down at the sand he had laughed at minutes earlier. The joke was still there in his memory, but now it felt smaller, cheaper, almost childish. Reynolds set the canteen down with care, no longer treating it like a piece of gear. He treated it like evidence. Emily looked past everyone toward the narrow window facing the motor pool, where the late afternoon sun turned the desert a hard white gold. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the room had to lean into it. There were children inside. The words changed everything, but Emily did not give them more than that. She did not tell the room how many. She did not describe their faces. She did not explain the sound of small shoes scraping across tile, or the way a child could become completely silent when fear had taken all the air out of him. She only stood beside the table with her gloves folded in one hand and her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the supply room walls. Tyler looked at the others, but no one looked back. The attention had moved away from him and settled on Emily with a weight he could not carry. Commander Reynolds picked up the canteen again and held it near the light. The metal body had a faint streak across the side, not paint, not rust, but something left by pressure and heat and hard use. He turned it slowly. The cap ring was bent. The strap had been torn and tied back together with a strip of medical tape. Emily had done that in the field. Reynolds knew her knots. Tight. Practical. No wasted movement. Why was it filled with sand, he asked. Emily breathed in once, controlled and shallow. It had to be heavy enough, sir. Tyler frowned before he could stop himself. Heavy enough for what? No one corrected him this time. They all wanted the answer, even if some of them were suddenly afraid of it. Emily turned slightly, facing the table instead of the room. The door would not hold. The words came out plain, almost empty. That was how real things sounded when they were too large to fit inside a sentence. Reynolds lowered the canteen back onto the table, but he kept his hand resting near it. The school door. Emily nodded. One classroom, east side of the building. The lower hinge was damaged. It kept swinging shut from the wind and pressure outside. The children were inside, low against the back wall. Smoke was coming through the broken windows. The supply room had become so quiet that the distant rumble of a generator sounded like thunder. A radio technician who had been standing by the charging station slowly removed his cap. Tyler's mouth opened, then closed. The sharpness in his face had started to collapse into confusion. Emily continued only because Reynolds was there, and because he had asked as her commander, not as an audience. I used the water first, she said. For cloth. For breathing. For keeping them calm. Her eyes lowered to the sand. After that, the canteen was empty. Reynolds understood before she finished. He looked at the mound on the table, at the dark grains, at the black flecks that were not jokes and not dirt and not failure. So you filled it. Emily nodded once. The room had sand against the far wall. I packed it in as tight as I could. The canteen was the only thing with enough weight that fit under the door. The youngest private in the room swallowed hard. Someone behind him whispered, "Oh, man," then immediately went silent, ashamed of even that much sound. Tyler stared at the canteen as if it had become something alive in front of him. Minutes earlier, he had shaken it for a laugh. Now he could imagine it wedged under a door, holding open a few inches of space while children crawled toward air, while Emily Carter stood between panic and order with a burned sleeve and a steady voice. Reynolds looked at her badge, the silver-winged shield now partly clean, catching the cold light again. How many made it out, he asked. Emily's answer came without pride, without drama, without even relief. 7, sir. The number moved through the room more powerfully than any speech could have. 7. Not a report. Not a rumor. 7 living children somewhere beyond the wire because an empty canteen had been made heavy with sand. The number stayed in the room after Emily said it. 7. It made the fluorescent lights feel too bright and the air too thin. Tyler Brooks looked at the dark sand on the table and tried to connect it to the word, but his mind kept returning to the sound of his own laughter. It sounded different now in memory. Smaller. Careless. The kind of sound a man made when he had not earned the right to speak. Commander Reynolds did not move for several seconds. He had led teams through long days and longer nights, but he had learned that not every act of courage announced itself with noise. Sometimes it came back quiet, covered in dust, carrying an object everyone else misunderstood. He turned toward the radio technician near the charging station. Find the mission traffic from the village, he said. All channels. Last 90 minutes. The technician nodded quickly and began working through the console, his fingers moving with a sudden seriousness. Emily's posture tightened almost imperceptibly. She did not want the recording played. Not because it would shame her, but because it would open a door she had already forced herself to close. She had done the job. The children were out. The report could wait. The room did not need to walk through it with her. Reynolds saw the change in her face. "Lieutenant," he said, softer now, "you do not have to say more than you already have." Emily gave a small nod, but her eyes remained on the sand. "Understood, sir." Tyler shifted his weight. He wanted to apologize, but the words felt too easy for what he had done. Sorry could not pull the joke back from the air. Sorry could not make him the kind of soldier who had looked at a burned sleeve and asked if she was all right instead of looking for a laugh. Before he could speak, the supply room door opened and Staff Sergeant Mallory Hayes stepped in carrying a sealed evidence pouch and a folded field blanket. She was a medic with 20 years of calm in her hands and no patience for foolishness. Her eyes moved over the room, catching the faces, the canteen, the sand, Emily. "Commander," she said. "The aid station confirmed the civilian transport arrived. All 7 children are stable." Emily closed her eyes for one brief second. It was the first visible crack in her stillness, not weakness, not relief exactly, but the body finally receiving permission to believe what the heart had been waiting to hear. When she opened her eyes again, they were clear. "Thank you, Sergeant." Mallory placed the evidence pouch on the table. Inside was a small strip of blue fabric, singed at one corner, with a cartoon star printed near the edge. Tyler stared at it. It did not belong in a military supply room. It belonged on a child's uniform, on a backpack, on an ordinary morning that should never have come near danger. Mallory looked at Tyler just long enough for him to lower his eyes. Then she turned back to Reynolds. "Found near the classroom doorway," she said. It was caught under the canteen strap. Reynolds did not open the pouch. He did not need to. Emily's hand moved slightly toward the silver-winged shield on her vest, as if grounding herself by touching the one clean mark left on her uniform. The radio console crackled behind them. Static filled the room first, then fragments of voices, comm calls, clipped responses, distance, urgency, wind. The technician looked over his shoulder. "Sir, I have the recording." Reynolds held Emily's gaze for a moment, asking without words. Emily looked at the canteen, then at the blue fabric, then toward the door as if she could still see the road beyond the wire. Finally, she said quietly, "Play it." The first sound from the recording was wind, thin and rough, dragging across the microphone in broken waves. Then came the steady rhythm of vehicle engines somewhere in the background, distant voices calling positions, and the clipped comm of the radio operator logging traffic from the village. Everyone in the supply room stood still. Even Tyler Brooks stopped shifting his feet. The technician adjusted the volume. Static rose, flattened, and then Emily Carter's voice came through. It was lower than the room remembered, controlled but strained by movement. "This is Carter. I have visual on the school. 7 children inside the east classroom. Visibility is poor. I am moving closer." Reynolds looked at her, but Emily kept her eyes on the table. Her expression did not change. The voice on the recording continued through a hiss of interference. "Carter, hold position," another voice answered. "Wait for clearance." There was a pause, filled with wind and a faint sound of shouting far from the microphone. Then Emily said, "Negative. They are too close to the smoke line. I can reach them." No one in the supply room spoke. The recording carried no drama, no music, no explanation. Just a woman making decisions faster than fear could catch her. A few seconds later, her breathing grew heavier, not panicked, just measured, the sound of someone moving low and fast under pressure. "I am at the outer wall," she said. "Windows damaged. Door unstable. Children are conscious. I am making contact." The radio crackled again. A child's small cry passed through the speaker for half a second and vanished beneath static. Tyler's face tightened. He looked down at his boots. On the recording, Emily's voice changed. It became softer, not toward command, but toward comfort. "Hey, sweetheart, look at me. You are doing great. Keep your shirt over your mouth. That is it. Stay low." Staff Sergeant Mallory Hayes folded her arms, but her eyes had gone bright. Reynolds lowered his chin, listening. The technician did not move except to steady the dial. Then came the part that made the canteen on the table feel heavier than steel. Emily's voice returned, closer to the microphone now. Using water for cloth. First child moving. Door will not hold. I need weight. Static swallowed the next few words. Then everyone heard the scrape. Metal against floor. Sand being packed in with fast, hard motions. Her breathing. A cough, quickly controlled. Then Emily again. Canteen is wedged. Door is open 8 inches. Sending them one at a time. The supply room seemed to shrink around that sentence. 8 inches. That was all. Not a grand opening. Not a perfect rescue route. Just 8 inches of space held by a battered canteen filled with sand. The recording continued. Emily counted them out. Each number spoken with the same steady focus. 1 out. 2 out. Keep moving. 3 out. Good job. Do not stand yet. 4 out. Between the numbers, she spoke to the children as if the world outside the room could be made smaller by the sound of her voice. Eyes on me. Breathe through the cloth. Follow my hand. You are almost there. Tyler looked at the blue fabric in the evidence pouch and swallowed. The last of his pride left him quietly. On the recording, Emily's voice thinned near the end, but it never broke. 6 out. I have the last one. She is scared. I am bringing her now. A long burst of static filled the room. Then, after several seconds, Emily's voice returned, faint but clear. 7 out. All 7 out. Moving them to cover. The technician stopped the playback without being told. For a moment, the only sound was the overhead lights. Emily reached for the canteen and brushed one grain of sand from its dented side with her thumb. Reynolds looked at Tyler, then at every person who had laughed. Now you know what it was for, he said. Reynolds did not raise his voice after the recording stopped. He did not need to. The room had already heard more than any command could say. Emily Carter stood beside the table with one hand resting near the canteen, her thumb still touching the dented metal as if checking that it was real. Her face remained composed, but the memory had returned in pieces behind her eyes, and for a moment the supply room fell away. She was back at the village school, low against the outer wall, the afternoon sun burning white across the courtyard. Dust moved in curtains along the ground. Somewhere beyond the building, men shouted orders she did not have time to answer. In front of her was the classroom door, damaged at the lower hinge, swinging inward and outward with every hard push of wind. Inside, 7 children crouched near the back wall beneath painted letters and paper stars. The youngest could not have been more than 5 years old. She had a blue collar on her school shirt and both hands pressed over her ears. Emily remembered the first thing she did was smile. Not because anything was safe, but because children looked for faces before they believed words. I am Emily, she had told them. We are going to move slow, and we are going to move together. Her canteen had been full then, heavy with clean water from the base. She poured it over torn cloth, over sleeves, over anything the children could hold to their mouths. She showed them how to breathe through the damp fabric. She turned fear into steps. One child first, then another. The door slammed once and startled them all. Emily caught it with her shoulder, felt the jolt through her ribs, and looked down for something to hold it open. There was no crate, no chair strong enough, no tool within reach. Only the canteen, suddenly empty, and the dark sand piled along the inner wall where dust had blown through a broken window. She moved without thinking. Cap off. Sand in. Pack it tight. Shake it down. More sand. More weight. Her fingers worked fast, scraping the floor, filling the metal until the canteen felt solid as a brick. She jammed it under the door and pressed once with her boot. The door held. Not wide. Not easy. Just enough. 8 inches. Enough for a small body to crawl through. Enough for hope to have a shape. Emily counted each child with the care of a person counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. She kept her voice low, steady, almost ordinary. You are doing great. Follow my hand. Keep your eyes down. That is it. The little girl with the blue collar stopped at the doorway, frozen by the open space and the noise outside. Emily removed the silver-winged shield badge from her vest and pressed it into the child's palm. Hold this for me, she whispered. Heroes return important things. The girl looked at the small silver emblem, then at Emily, and nodded. She crawled through. 7 came out. 7 reached air. 7 were placed into waiting arms beyond the courtyard wall. Emily did not remember standing after that. She remembered the empty weight on her vest where the badge had been, then later the small hand that returned it at the aid station, smudged with dust but still shining. Now, back in the supply room, Emily touched the badge on her chest. The same emblem. The same promise returned. Tyler Brooks watched her hand move and finally understood that he had not been laughing at sand. He had been laughing at the space that saved 7 lives. Staff Sergeant Mallory Hayes broke the silence first, not with words, but by lifting the field blanket from her arm and placing it gently beside the evidence pouch. It was folded with care, the way medics folded things when they knew an object had carried more than its size. On top of it rested a small paper star, creased at one corner and colored unevenly in yellow crayon. Emily saw it, and her breath caught so slightly that only Reynolds noticed. Mallory looked at her. "The youngest girl asked me to give you that," she said. "She said the lady with the silver wings told her heroes bring things back." Emily did not reach for the paper right away. For a moment, her hand hovered over it, careful, almost afraid to touch something so small in front of so many people. Then she picked it up between 2 fingers and held it against her palm. The room watched her, but no one stared the way they had before. There was no curiosity now, no judgment, no hunger for a mistake. There was only the quiet respect that arrives when people understand they have been standing beside courage and calling it ordinary. Tyler Brooks stepped back from the table. His face had lost all its color. He looked younger than he had 10 minutes earlier, no longer the loud corporal trying to impress the room, but a man seeing the shape of his own carelessness for the first time. "Lieutenant," he said, but the word failed there. Emily looked at him. Not coldly, not kindly, simply looked. Tyler swallowed and tried again. "Lieutenant Carter, I was wrong." The sentence sounded plain, and because it was plain, it carried farther than an excuse would have. "I treated something I did not understand like a joke. I treated you like a joke. I am sorry." Emily held the paper star in one hand and rested the other near the canteen. Her silver-winged shield badge shone faintly on her vest, scratched now, less perfect than before, and somehow more hers. "Do better next time," she said. There was no anger in it. That made Tyler stand straighter. "Yes, ma'am." Reynolds watched the exchange without interrupting. Then he turned toward the entire room. "Every person here is going to remember this," he said. "Not because Lieutenant Carter needs your applause. She does not. You are going to remember it because you saw how fast pride can make a soldier blind." No one moved. Reynolds picked up the canteen, still dented, still dusty, still holding grains of dark sand in its seams. He placed it in the center of the table as if setting down something official. "This is not trash. This is not a failed piece of gear. This is evidence of judgment under pressure, discipline under fear, and service without an audience." Tyler kept his eyes on the floor. The others did too. Emily folded the paper star once along its existing crease and slid it carefully into the pocket behind her badge. Mallory gave a small nod, the kind one professional gave another when words would only make the moment smaller. Outside, the late sun lowered over the motor pool, turning the windows gold. Inside, nobody laughed. The canteen sat between them, heavy with sand and meaning, and every soldier in that room understood that the smallest object on a battlefield could become the largest lesson of a lifetime. The next morning, the supply room looked ordinary again, but no one entered it the same way. The tables had been wiped clean. The radios were charging. The crates were stacked in straight lines. Outside, the base moved through its usual rhythm of engines, boots, and voices carrying across the desert air. Yet at the center of the room, on a cleared steel table beneath a small lamp, sat the canteen. Commander Reynolds had ordered it left exactly as it was. Dents, tape, worn strap, and dark grains of sand still caught around the cap. Beside it rested the sealed pouch with the blue fabric and a note from the aid station confirming 7 children safe. No speech had been made. No ceremony had been called. That was not Emily Carter's way. But by sunrise, every soldier on the base had heard enough to understand why the room had gone silent the day before. Tyler Brooks arrived before formation and stood in front of the table alone. He did not touch the canteen. He only looked at it for a long time, seeing the joke he had made and the truth he had missed. When Emily entered, he turned immediately and stood at attention. "Good morning, Lieutenant Carter." His voice was steady, but quiet. Emily paused near the doorway. Her uniform was clean now, her pale hair pulled back, her silver-winged shield badge polished, but still scratched at the edge where a child's fingers had held it. She looked at Tyler, then at the canteen. "Good morning, Corporal." That was all. No punishment in her tone. No victory. just a standard being offered back to him, if he was willing to meet it. Tyler held his posture until she passed. Across the room, soldiers who had laughed the day before moved differently now. They gave her space without making a show of it. They listened when she spoke. They noticed the extra water in her pack, the medical tape on her gear, the way she checked every strap before stepping outside the wire. Respect had entered the room without being announced. Later that week, Reynolds had the canteen placed in a glass case in the hallway outside the operations center. He refused a long inscription. He said long words gave people somewhere to hide. The small metal plate beneath it carried only one line: sand-filled canteen. 7 children alive. Emily walked past it every morning on her way to briefing. She never stopped for long. Sometimes her eyes moved to the case for half a second. Sometimes her hand brushed the badge on her vest. Then she kept walking, because heroes in uniform rarely had the luxury of standing beside their own stories. They had another patrol to prepare, another map to study, another life to protect before anyone knew protection was needed. One afternoon, the youngest girl's paper star was copied and placed beside the canteen, not as decoration, but as proof that courage did not always look like what people expected. Sometimes it looked like a quiet woman returning from the desert with dust on her face. Sometimes it looked like a battered piece of gear filled with sand. Sometimes it looked like silence held long enough for truth to speak for itself. Tyler never laughed at another soldier's burden again. None of them did. And whenever new arrivals asked why an old canteen sat in glass like a medal, someone would point to the inscription and tell them the lesson Emily Carter had never needed to say out loud. Respect is not demanded in a loud room. It is earned in the moments when no one is watching, when fear is close, when the door is closing, and someone still finds a way to hold it open.